Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Pat Reed, and I'm here with Barbara Despres. I'm going to use the correct pronunciation. And we're at the Ashby Public Library on January 22nd, 2023. And Barbara's agreed to participate in our oral history project and is here this morning to talk a little bit about her links to Ashby and life growing up. And she comes from a family of individuals who have long links to Ashby. So why don't we start there, Barbara? You want to talk a little bit about the family ties and?
Okay. Well, my great-grandfather and his wife came from Maine, and they decided to settle in Ashby. And they bought the house at 5 Old Northfield Road with help from friends, because actually the house at that time was being sold for taxes. And they wanted the grand total of $1,500 for the house. And my great-grandfather and his wife didn't have $1,500, of course. And he got help from a couple of his sons. And they bought the house, and they moved in with their 4 children. My grandfather, Ralph, his brother, Alfred, another brother, Lydy, who later on built another house in Ashby, and their sister, Alice. And they lived there. That was about 1917. And they lived there until 1932, at which time my grandfather and grandmother, who by that time had had 4 children, were living on Main Street. And then the Depression hit. And what they did was they moved down to the house on Old Northfield Road. So they had 2 generations living there at that time, actually 3. And there's an interesting story about the house, I think, I'd like to bring up.
Well, please
the house is actually older than it's given credit for. It was built approximately 1750. And it was built during the French and Indian Wars. And it was built as a tavern, as a stopping place, as the troops were going up to Deerfield to fight during that war. And the house was actually built as a brothel and a tavern. And the funny story, when we were moving in, my husband was working on the roof, and one of the members of the Historical Society stopped, who lived in that neighborhood, and she said to him, "Do you realize this house used to be a brothel?" And he said, "Yes, and we plan to continue the tradition." And she just went, but the house is that old, and if you look at certain places, you can see the original beams. And actually, in one of our rooms, we have the actual exterior wall, the original. So it is quite old. It's had a lot done to it, so it could never be considered, a museum piece. Mm-hmm. It's been upgraded as the years go by.
So it started life as a tavern / brothel. Mm-hmm. And was there land around it too? Did it later on become a farm? Or
yes, there was quite a bit of land. And my grandfather, and his brother Lydy Ratcliffe used to farm it. And I have pictures that I hope will be included in this that show the 2 of them with the draft horses they used, because there's a huge hill behind the house, and they farmed that with the horses. And from the top of the hill where Harold Chataway lives down to our house, and then across the street. And at the time, they owned about 40 acres, the 40 acres in an old house. Mm-hmm. And then as my mother and her sisters grew up, they helped on the farm. And later on, my youngest aunt, Martha, and my grandfather started a ski tow on the hill back in the 1940s. So they've been doing all kinds of things. Gradually, a lot of that land was sold off. My grandfather sold it off. So now we're left with about 7 acres. And my husband and I moved in 1999. And we've been working on it ever since.
It's an ongoing project.
It is. When it's that old, you always have something to do, that's for sure.
So it's interesting to me, you mentioned that there was a period of time where the family had the ski tow. Was that for public use? Or?
Yes, it was.
It was?
Yes. In fact, when I first went when I went for my first job interviewing when I graduated from college, I went to the school not knowing, thinking I didn't know anyone. And I was talking to this gentleman, the principal who was interviewing me, and he said, "Do you know Martha Ratcliffe?" And I said, "Well, yeah, she's my aunt." And he said, "I used to go skiing there." And I looked at him, and I spoke his name as I spoke it as a child. And he says, "Yeah, that's me," because his name was Joe Avini. Mm-hmm. And I always called him Josephini when I was like 4 or 5 years old. So there was a connection there, too. I always said, "You gave me my first job because you knew my aunt." He dated her for a while.
So the house itself has a long history, and you've been there, you said, since 1999.
99, right.
Right. But there were 2 generations that came before you that lived in Ashby, starting with your great-grandparents?
Great-grandparents lived there. I don't think they actually did much. They were fairly elderly when they moved in. It was my grandfather's generation that did the most. Mm-hmm. And his sister and one of his brothers moved to New Jersey, which left my grandfather and his brother. And my brother, or his brother rather, built a house on Hosmer Road, the house that's up on the hill beside Fort Hill. His name was Lydy Ratcliffe. He's the only Lydy we ever have heard of. In fact, I can remember helping build the barn. I was, walking around with a hammer and hitting things. And then he bought 3 cows, Judith, Barbara, and Joan, my cousin, myself, and my sister. And we thought that was the biggest thrill to have a cow named after us. But he lived up there with his wife and his 2 sons, Everett and Donald. They were both in the war during this, excuse me, you might want to just, I'm getting my tongue tangled. They both served during World War II. And Everett made it through, and then he got home and caught polio. And he died within like 2 days. And by this time he'd been married with 2 children. So that was kind of a tragedy for them. So my father, as I say, grandfather, stayed on the farm, and then when he passed away in 1953, excuse me, and my grandmother stayed there, and she was not happy having a 10-room house. She was in her 50s, but she was like 90, So my parents were living in Fitchburg with my sister and I, and they thought it would be a really great idea, or my grandmother thought it would be a really great idea, if we all moved to Ashby. We'd have, better schools, because I was going to one of the schools in Fitchburg, and I had to walk a mile by myself because I was in the wrong zone. And my father said, "Yes, let's get this girl off the streets." So we moved up there in 1953. And I started school.
How old at that time?
I was 7, going on 8. And that's when I started going to school at Ashby Elementary. My sister was a baby, so it took her a little bit longer to get to school. But
And then you completed your education in Ashby.
Yes, right.
Okay.
And I must say we got very good educations, because there's quite a few of us in that class that went to college. Out of a class of 20, I think there were like 12 who went on to school. So.
Talk a little bit about that in terms of what your experience was in this. That's impressive that a number of students went on to college. What do you think contributed to that?
Well, I'm speaking now about Ashby High School.
Right.
Not elementary school,
Right.
not junior high, but at Ashby High School. I always look at it as we had like a private school education, because there were so few of us in a class. Sometimes there were no more than 10 or 12 in a class, depending on what it was. And we got individualized attention. You couldn't really get away with anything, and you could always ask for extra help. And everybody knew each other, and they knew your parents. So I will admit, though, I got kept after school one day my sophomore year because we laughed at a man who was pulling a chicken apart in the school desk. I mean, you had all kinds of experiences. But I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I don't, I'm sure that doesn't happen at North Middlesex now. You know, maybe if you're taking a very advanced class or something and there's 6 students in it. But I don't think it would, would happen if you're taking American history. You don't get that individualized attention that we got.
So you graduated from high school. Is there anything else about just your overall educational experience in Ashby? Were there any particular teachers that stood out to you or any experiences?
There were 2 or 3 teachers that stood out to me, and I think to many other people. The first one would be Alice Willett. She taught junior high school English, French. I didn't take French, but she taught that, and she was just wonderful, and she made sure you knew what you were talking about when you got through. Edward Caveney, who was a math teacher. And boy, if you weren't knowing your multiplication tables by the time you were in the 6th grade, you learned them by the time you were in the 7th grade. I'm trying to think of anyone else who really stands out in a positive way. That I'd want to mention the name, but we also had student teachers, which was a good experience for them and for us, I think, because we got used to other people, other ways. But it was just a very close-knit group. We only had 30 kids in our class, but the next class maybe had 28, and you knew everybody in that class. And then as the next class came up, you knew everybody there. If you didn't know them before from living in town, you certainly knew them then because they were younger classmen. You could make fun of them. So, but I remember things like, basketball games. That was that and sock hops with a big entertainment for us back then. And another thing I remember very fondly is when we got to be juniors, we had naturally a junior prom. And our theme was, and I can't remember the exact theme, but it was about Paris. We built the Eiffel Tower in our barn at home. It was 30 feet high, just high enough to fit in the school auditorium, all made out of cardboard. Every piece was cut to look just like it was in Paris, and then we spray painted it silver. And there's a picture of it in our high school yearbook that maybe I'll slip to Harold and say, would you like to take a picture of this? But we just had more fun doing things like that. And, going to movies and things like that. We didn't have, some of the structured things that they have in bigger schools. But we had a lot of interesting things with interesting people, I think.
It's interesting that you mentioned the proms in particular, because I think they're legendary in Ashby for anybody who went to school.
Right.
And I think at some point we may want to make a feature just about prom days. But it involved a lot of class participation to set it up. And is there anything else you remember about that?
About the proms?
In particular, yeah.
I remember going to them, and everybody, of course, you had to get dressed up. You had to have a new gown, and the boys and men had tuxedos on. And you still look at the pictures. Like I look at my yearbook occasionally, and I see these, and I think, oh, I wonder whatever happened to them, or I wonder whatever happened to her. People that you didn't know as well. But it was just a very elegant night for Ashby. Because everybody was dressed to the nines, having a good time without alcohol. We didn't have it. I don't remember having a disc jockey, but we had people playing music. It was not a big, expensive prom. It was just nobody had limousines and that type of thing. It was a group of kids getting together, having a good time, preparing for it, and having a good time. The only time it wasn't so much fun is the day after when you had to clean it up.
I've seen a few of the yearbooks from Ashby, and what's striking is how each student had participation in multiple things, whether they were class officers or, it just seemed like sports participation was really critical.
Oh, yes.
Did you play any sports or?
Unfortunately, I'm not exactly the athletic type. The only sport I ever excelled at was volleyball, and that was because I could serve really well. I couldn't hit it back, but I could serve. So, no, I was not. I was a good observer, but no, I didn't. I didn't play. I played tennis later in life, and I was much better at that. But we didn't have tennis at that time at Ashby.
Right.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you came to Ashby at around age 7, had the family links ahead of time, so the community was familiar to you. Can you just describe Ashby as it was, or your first memories of coming to town?
Well, my first memories would be much earlier than that, because we'd come up to visit my grandparents. And one of the fondest memories I have is my grandfather would go up to the Dynamite Cafe, which was where Sheldon was until a couple of years ago. And it was a green and white lattice-trimmed building. And he'd go up there to have coffee, and I had ice cream. Don't tell your mother you had ice cream. Don't tell your mother. But we'd go up there, and he'd sit and talk for an hour or so with the fellow who was running it. And I sat outside and had ice cream, and nobody was afraid that somebody would come along and pick me up, And then I'd go back in and say, well, my ice cream is finished now. Like, what's next? And I can also remember between leaving there and going to our house, which is 2 miles, sometimes I'd fall asleep. I can remember that. And he had this great big DeSoto, I think it was, or something. And, I'd wake up and I'd be in the yard, and this was a huge car compared to what I was like at 4 or 5 years old. Yeah. I also remember, I also remember going to Fitchburg Mill, the Fitchburg Yarn Mill with him. He was the electrician down there. And we'd go down, and I'd get a chance to walk all around the mills and see all these men working. And I just thought I was so damn important. This is my grandfather. He keeps your lights running. Yeah, that wasn't really related to Ashby, but he was, so, yeah. And that was at the time that Frank Lyman was running Fitchburg Yarn.
I didn't realize there was a connection there.
I believe there is. That a lot of the things I'm saying about some of the older things are things I've heard through the family. Whether they're 100% correct or 80% correct, I can't be sure. So I'm going to just beg off and say, this is what I heard growing up.
Sure. So you had the benefit of an extended family in Ashby and spending time with them. What would be some of the other things that you would spend time doing as a child?
Oh, playing in the yard. Both my sister and I, she used to chase salamanders and pollywogs. I used to build bridges in the driveway. She became a nurse. I became a teacher. I think there was a follow-through there.
Sure.
Yeah. We just played outside, and there'd be a few neighborhood kids. Shall I mention some names?
Sure.
Billy Green, Bill Atherton. There was a family who lived down in the first house near us. We'd get together and play a baseball game, ride our bicycles, do all kinds. That's what we did to entertain ourselves. The only thing that really disappointed me was when I lived in Fitchburg. We had the old roller skates with keys. In the street I lived on, you could get at the top and roll down. There wasn't that didn't go on in Ashby. There was no place I could do that safely. Would you mind repeating the question again?
Oh, we're just talking about different things you did as a child.
Right. And that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. Yeah, it was mainly playing outside. I can remember, Saturday morning cartoons, and my mother said, "You've been watching those long enough outside," and helped my sister look for pollywogs and things like that. And I was the one in charge of putting them in the jars.
Sounds like you had a lot of time for unstructured play and just to enjoy being outside.
Right. I mean, we spent time inside doing things, but I'm talking about the summer now. The winter, the fall and winter was pretty much taken care of with school and homework and that type of thing. But during the summer, we just wanted to be outside playing. Yeah.
Before we get too far away from the early years, you haven't had a chance to say anything about your mother and father. Do you want to talk about them a little bit?
Oh, sure. I think I skipped a generation there.
We got your grandparents in,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, my mother was Evelyn Ratcliffe. And my father was Edwin Conner. And he was born and raised in Fitchburg. And he met my mother through friends. He went to work for Simon Saar Steel Company at one point. He spent most of his life there. And he knew a fellow who worked with him who had a friend who had another friend who was single that they thought maybe these people would hit it off. And they introduced, and they happened to go to the grand opening in Fitchburg of Gone with the Wind. They double dated. And that's how that story started. And my parents were married 2 years later. And my mother, as I told you, was Evelyn Ratcliffe. My father's, and I did tell you this, I'm glad you can cut these little bits off. Edwin Conner. And another funny story, it's not really funny, but it is now. My father was born and raised Irish. And when my grandmother met him, her reaction was, well, he's just shanty Irish. You can't marry him. And my mother looked at my grandmother and said, what do you think we are? They weren't Irish, but it's like she was looking down at him because he was Irish. And, and I think that lasted her whole life. If he had been a man from Ashby that's fine, but no, she married somebody from Fitchburg who was Irish. But they proceeded to have 2 children, myself in 1946 and my sister in 1952. And when we moved to Ashby, my mother got involved in things like the Girl Scouts. She came to work at the library, assisting Lois Thatcher, who was here at the time, because Lois was still teaching school, so they needed someone to be here in the afternoons. So that's another great time, because some friends and I would come down here on Tuesdays and Fridays when the library was open and hang out upstairs and just have a great time, because my mother was there, and we didn't really get in trouble. My father became a policeman in Ashby, and he was a policeman for several years, starting out as an auxiliary policeman and then a regular officer.
I know that you have mentioned your mother in the library, and she had a long career as a librarian in Ashby.
She did. She started about 1960, I think. I don't have the dates memorized, but that's when she started working with Lois Thatcher. And she became full-time librarian in 1972. And then she was librarian until 1992, at which point the state said, Mrs. Conner, you have to retire. You're 70, you have to retire. And my mother was so angry about that, she worked for another year. Because they couldn't force her to do that at that time.
Right.
But she said, I'm not going to let them tell me when I'm going to leave. I'm going to tell them when I'm going to leave. And it was the state, it wasn't the local. So she left, and then it was shortly after that Maya Lepore became librarian.
Right. So you had your mother certainly as a role model, because she was working and engaged in the town activities. Were there other people in town that you remember as being particularly good role models, or people who had some influence as you were growing up?
One that sticks out in my mind is Irene Pankowski. She lived over on Piper Road. And when I was in Girl Scouts, one of the badges we could earn was for hospitality. And she took us through every step of how to set a table, how to do this, which side to pour from, all of those type of things. And I remember them to this day. And every once in a while, my husband and I will have a disagreement about which side the forks and the spoons and the knives go on. I say, no, I know they go on this side because Irene taught me that in 1950 or whatever it was. Not 1950, but we had such a great time setting tables. And I mean, this sounds really boring, but it wasn't to us as kids who, we were learning something that was important for grown-up ladies, That's how it was looked at that point.
A real etiquette class.
It was an etiquette class,
Yeah.
yes. And you had to learn how to come in and how to sit bring your skirt down. You had to wear skirts to these. Bring your skirt down and slide into the chair. All of those type of things that we kind of laugh at now or are done automatically, but we all learned that because some of us probably came galloping to our kitchen tables and slid into them, back then, yeah. As kids do now, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm trying to think. Evie Perner. I was very good friends with her oldest daughter, Mary Jane Perner, MJ Perner. And I knew her. I'm going to get into another family story here. She and I were not cousins, but we shared an aunt and uncle. My mother's sister married her mother's brother, which made them both my aunt and uncle and both her aunt and uncle, but we weren't related. But I knew her before we moved here and came up to visit the year before we actually moved to Ashby. And she and I were best friends all the way right through college. But Evie was always, I couldn't figure out how she raised 5 children, ran a business, and was as nice as she was. I mean, she was just the nicest person, and, the kids all kind of toed the mark, but you never know, you could never tell. It was like, she just enjoyed her family and enjoyed having friends over, her kids' friends. And, yeah.
So you had some people who influenced you, and how did that affect you when you were thinking what you were going to do once you finished high school? Were you thinking of any particular career, or?
Well, I knew I didn't want to be a nurse. That was something that, there were about 4 choices when I was finishing high school that I could have been. A nurse, which was out as far as I was concerned. A hairdresser, which was always out as far as I was concerned. A secretary. My typing wasn't very good. It was good enough to get me through school. Or a teacher, because those were about the only opportunities open to women at that time. So I took the lesser of the 4 evils and became a teacher and was very glad.
And so what was your educational preparation to become a teacher?
4 years at Fitchburg State. Student teaching. I think the 4 years in college were actually, they were more fun than the years in Ashby. And that was probably not a good thing. But it was during the 60s, 64 to 68. In fact, we had a group that actually had some influence on Ashby. We formed a singing group to sing protest songs, of course, Blowing in the Wind and all of this for the time. And it was almost all people from Ashby and friends of ours that we met at college who actually had musical ability, which we didn't have. And we became a group called the John Fitch Society. And we used to put on shows, charge like $1 admission, and then we gave the money to different groups in town. Maybe, okay, this time we're going to donate our proceeds to the Grange, or this time we're going to donate them to the 4th of July parade or something like that. So we did that. We did some on the band concert. We did on the bandstand, rather. We did a lot of them at the Maya Hall. In fact, that's how I met my husband. He was not part of the group because he would not get up there and sing. But 2 or 3 of his friends were very musical. They were all biology majors at the college. So he used to come and we said, well, we're going to make him the treasurer because he can't sing, so he's going to be the treasurer. But we had a lot of fun for those years. It kept us off the streets.
So you were in college in the 1960s, and you had this experience with other young people and singing, and you described it as a bit of, protest flavor in terms of the choice of music and that kind of thing. How was your reception in terms of the people of Ashby and other people?
Well, I think there were some people who didn't come because they just didn't agree with the fact that we were singing that type of song. And we were college students, and that was not all that common back then. Each generation sends more kids to college, or it used to be that way, because my parents never would have had a chance to go to college. My sister and I both did. So, but the people in Ashby, it was always the same people who supported us. First of all, our parents, who probably, and I know all of them did not agree with us, but they agreed that we had a right to do what we were doing. And we weren't being radical. We were just singing "Blowing in the Wind" or, something like that. We weren't singing any type of hate songs. It's just all of us were against the Vietnam War, thought it was ridiculous, and wanted to be, have it known.
Now, when you were growing up, were you affiliated with one of the churches in town, or?
Oh, yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. We were very affiliated with the Unitarian Church. I was affiliated from the church from the moment I was born because my mother had grown up at the Congregational Church. My father was raised Catholic. And after a nun broke his hand for being left-handed at St. Bernard School, and my mother was not thrilled with some of the things she was hearing. When they got married, they were married in the Congregational Church, but both of them drifted to the Unitarian Church in Fitchburg. And it's something that went along with their values. So when I started to get ready to go to school, first of all, I was sent to the nursery school and the kindergarten at the Unitarian Church even before I got to first grade. I think I said to you on the phone that my parents overeducated me in nap taking and eating stale crackers and things like that. We were first affiliated down in Fitchburg. Then after we moved to Ashby, we became affiliated with the church up here. And I can remember every Sunday you went to church. You got dressed up and went to church. And my parents were very involved, and my dad especially would put on suppers to raise money for the church. He had worked part-time as a chef, and he was actually a very good cook. So he would do that. And my mother was doing all kinds of other things, the fairs. When they started having the really big fairs in Ashby in the 60s, it was my mother and aunt who facilitated those. And it was a whole family project. Everybody would my father put on the supper, and I ran the tea room, and my mother ran everything. But I also belonged to the LRY group, Liberal Religious Youth. I mean, these all sound kind of radical for the 60s. As a matter of fact, I was elected Miss LRY to represent the church for the bicentennial in 1967. And I'm still kidded about that by my husband. But it was a lifelong tradition for both of them, and it's still ongoing with me. Although I'm not affiliated with the church, it's still very much ingrained. Yeah.
It sounded like the church certainly had a big role in community life. Now, they ran the preschool and the kindergarten
in Fitchburg.
In
Fitchburg.
Fitchburg.
Unitarian Church, yes.
Oh, I see.
And it was basically lessons in singing, eating, as I said, eating stale crackers, taking a nap twice a day. When the last thing a 4 or 5-year-old wants to do is take a nap at 10 o'clock in the morning, And I do have a very funny story about that. I don't know if you're interested, but I've never been real fond, at least back then, fond of singing. And every day we had to gather around the piano and sing some songs. And I've always had a problem with talking when I shouldn't have been talking. And the teacher, Mrs. Bowen, said to me, "Barbara, you're going to have to leave us for a while because you're interrupting our singing. I want you to go across the hall to a room over there and sit there for a while while we decide whether you're going to sing or you're going to talk." So I went over, and there's one of the Sunday school classrooms, all dark, no lights on, just the window. And I was sitting there on this bench, looking around, and there was a picture of a man up on the wall. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And I went running back in. I said, there's a man in there. I don't know who it is, but it's very scary. And she went running in. It was a picture of Jesus Christ on the wall. I'd never seen one before. And it really, I didn't know who this man with the beard was. He didn't look at all. You know, and I'm not saying that to be sacrilegious. It's just, you know, having my background, even at 4 years old, I knew this wasn't somebody I knew. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I got in trouble for talking in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. I got in trouble for talking most of the way through school.
And then you went to college and became a teacher and got to talk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
and had a chance to tell the ones who were talking to be quiet.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So you met your husband while you were a student.
That's right.
In Fitchburg.
Uh-huh.
And do you want to talk a little bit of getting...
I was an education major, elementary education major, and my husband was a biology major. So those twains didn't meet at all. But the first year, I guess second semester, he happened to walk into the lounge, or commuter's lounge, with 2 or 3 friends that we did know. And he sat down and was talking, and somebody introduced us. Okay, that's very nice. We sat there and talked. And he later told me that that was the day he decided who he was going to marry. And did. Mm-hmm. 6 years later, yeah. Mm-hmm. But he came from Westboro. He and his family had a big working farm there at the time. It was a birthplace of Eli Whitney. And it was in the family from his grandfather's time until just 2 years ago when the remaining members of the family sold it. He had 2 sisters who, Frank was supposed to be the priest, just like my father was supposed to have been the priest. And you'd like me to tell the church story?
Sure.
Okay. When we decided to get married, we went to talk to his priest. And his priest said, oh no, we can't do this. This priest was probably 75 at the time and old school. And he said, you just can't, she's going to have to convert. And then he took Frank into the room, another room, and talked to him. And then he took me into the room and told me I was going to have to convert if I wanted to marry this man. And I'm going, man, he's only 21. What do you know? But I told my husband, I will lie. Because to me, I won't be, you know. But anyway, we found a younger priest who said, oh, sure, where are you getting married? And we wanted to get, I did, and I knew he did as well, because he knew it meant something to me, to get married at the church up here. So we talked to the priest. He said, sure, I'll be glad to come up. And at the time, our Reverend Larry Jaffa was the minister up here. And we talked to him. He said, I have no problem with that. So we arranged to have an ecumenical service at the Unitarian Church. Father Hansen, a priest, came up and married us, and along with Reverend Jaffa. And it was the first ecumenical marriage in town. No one else had had a service at either one of the churches, a public service. Maybe someone had walked up to see a minister. And on top of that, because I was teaching first grade, and the principal I referred to earlier, his son was in that class, and his wife, and he and his wife, and then another woman who, this was another connection to Ashby, her father had been the basketball coach in Ashby during the 30s. And my mother and 2 of my 3 aunts all were on the basketball team at the same time. And, well, we think his grandson was in the class. So all the parents got together and they brought all 23 of the kids to the wedding, which was, I was really, I remember walking into the church and looking up on the side and seeing all these kids, and they were all going, hey, Miss Conner, hey, Miss Conner. It was funny. Yeah. So.
And you have the press clippings too.
I do have the press clippings, which I hope can be included.
Sure, for sure.
And it says, when Barbara Conner got married, her children were very glad. And then you turn the page and it says, all 23 of them. This was on the first page of the Worcester Telegram the next morning.
And when was that? When did you get married?
We got married on November 22nd, 1969, right? Don't tell my husband that I just forgot what year it was.
No, he won't know.
No, he won't see this, right? No.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, it was, and then we still have some pictures at home of here. Here are my parents. Here's my husband's side of the family. Here's my first grade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you taught in town for a while.
I taught in Westminster.
In Westminster.
In Westminster
Mm-hmm.
for several years. Yeah, and then I taught in Shrewsbury.
Because you and your husband moved away for a time.
Right, we moved to West Boylston and lived there for 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was teaching in Westboro. I was teaching in Westminster. So West Boylston was halfway between. We had 140 and those roads to get us to work. So that's what we did. And then in 1999, we moved back to Ashby, and my mother could not keep the house any longer. She was, unfortunately, suffering with dementia. So she said, I'll give it to you. You won't have a mortgage. It'll be, I'm going like, oh, right, Mom, yes. First thing we had to do when we moved in was replace the front door, because if you walked through the front door, you fell through a hole in the floor, because she had not been able to keep it up by herself. My dad passed away in 1987. So she lived alone with my grandmother. My grandmother passed away in 91. So my mother was alone for 8 years, and as I say, she started to suffer from dementia. So we said yes, but it wasn't under her terms. It was under our pocketbook's terms,
And then I understand from chatting with you that it's been a project of doing some updating and repairs over the years. And
well, the first year, that had not been that much updating done. I mean, cosmetically, yes. But the first 2 months we moved in, we had a new roof put on the house, a new front door going into the hallway, a whole new heating system, all new wiring. My husband and my brother-in-law did a lot of work ripping. We had to take down the old horsehair plaster, pull down ceilings, and have mouse droppings and anything you can imagine come down and replace all the ceilings. When we replaced some of the walls, we discovered that what they used for uprights were trees. And in my living room to this day, if you could pull the plaster, or not plaster, I'm trying to think of the word I want now.
the wallboard.
Wallboard, thank you. You would see half trees used as supports. But what I know I told you during the time they were pulling up the bathroom floor, new plumbing, the whole new plumbing system too, by the way. They pulled up a board, and my husband says, "Look at this," and it was signed by my great grandfather. I think it said 1917. This is when they put the bathroom in the house, because up until that time, actually a little bit later, I think, there was an outhouse in what is now the corner of our family room. It was a shed, and we upgraded the shed to an actual room. I didn't bring it today because I was thinking it was this big. I hadn't seen it in a while, and it's about 5 feet tall. So we'll have my husband bring it another time. So it was a labor of love for about 10 or 15 years, and now we're going through it all again. We just had a second roof put on, all new windows, and we've been doing more work, taking the wallpaper we put on then off and painting.
So the project continues.
The project, it's ongoing. And I'm sure the next people who live in our house will be doing the same type of thing.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've had this long association with Ashby, moving here as a child and then leaving for a while, coming back, and it sounds like you're ready to spend your retirement years at Ashby as well. So what do you think the ongoing tie is to the community, or what keeps you in Ashby?
Oh, it's many things. Number one, it's my youth. I mean, my childhood. I grew up here. It's home. But the fact, I like living in Ashby because if you want to be involved in something, you can be. If you don't want to be involved, they'll leave you alone. A few weeks ago, I attended an art class here at the library on doodling. And that's when I discovered I don't even doodle well. I have about this much artistic ability. I can do other things, but I can't draw or doodle.
And that class was sponsored here at the library.
Right. And I know there's going to be another one just pretty soon about doodling and sketching.
Right.
Which I'm not going to attend because I can't doodle and I know I can't sketch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but good luck to all the people who can.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Can you think of other kinds of activities that you might participate in if it was of interest in right here in Ashby? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I think I've reached a place in my life where I'm very happy not to be a joiner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We go to town meetings. We take place in those kind of events that affect the town. I joined the Democratic Town Committee, and that's not really popular. I think sometimes if you just had small get-togethers where people could sit and talk. But I'm also not ready for the senior citizens group.
So what do you described the ties you have to Ashby. Is there anything else that, as the community grows and develops, that some thoughts you have about Ashby in the future, things that might need some time or attention? Does anything come to mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is the school situation right now. But I certainly hate to see an elementary school leave the town. Having spent 8 years over in Townsend, in the school department over there, after I retired, I went back to work. I would like to see the kids in Ashby. This is my opinion. I would like to see the young kids stay in Ashby. That's one of my goals.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned when you were talking earlier the bicentennial for the town. And I didn't really pick up on that at the time, but I'm thinking there are certain things that I've seen during my time in Ashby where the town has come together for some major event. Yeah. Do you have any other particular memories of that bicentennial or other kinds of events that have happened over the years?
Well, it used to be every year they had a Memorial Day parade and a 4th of July parade. And the community came together and groups marched, and the Girl Scouts and the band and the Boy Scouts, and sometimes played bands and things from other towns or other communities.
I guess my last question has to do with the fact that people who have lived in the last few decades have experienced tremendous changes with the advent of the computer. A lot of events affiliated with different military situations, just a lot of growth and development of the country. Are there what do you think was the most difficult time as you look back at your life in terms of?
I guess I'm very fortunate. I haven't had a really difficult life, and I realize that. Didn't come from a wealthy family or anything like that, but I also didn't have any great tragedies in my life. One of the hardest things I had to deal with, and it happened in Ashby, I was sitting in a class in Ashby High School, I think Problems of Democracy, in 1963, and all of a sudden the radio came on and announced that John Kennedy had been killed. And that was a group of us who'd known each other for, at least for me, for 10 years, all sharing something that was unthinkable at that time. And ironically, the day before I was graduating from college, we got the news that his brother, Robert Kennedy, had been killed. So those were two things that still are tied together in my mind. Graduations and them both being killed.
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time, Barbara.
Well, I
and
appreciate
sitting
being
down.
asked, and I had no idea that there was anything I could contribute, but
Absolutely, it's been wonderful, and I think the value for people in the town today and future generations is really to have some record of what life was like and what we hope it will continue to be as the community
Right.
grows and thrives. So that's the goal. All right.
all right, well, thank you,
Barb.
Pat.
Thanks.
Thank you.